Hello and welcome to the Patreon channel of True Crime Rocket Science. This is something new, a three-parter dealing with the aftermath to essentially the phone data review. There's one episode remaining, episode 50, in the phone data review, but on our way to getting there, I'm going to be doing 3 episodes dealing with the aftermath of the phone data review. The first episode, which is August 21st, obviously 2 years ago today, Chris Watts was formally charged with the murders of his wife and 2 daughters. It was his second appearance at court in a sort of trial scenario, and I think many of us were kind of anticipating that we were going to see quite a lot of him in court, that this was going to be a very big court case, one of the biggest in high-profile true crime history in America. Little did we know that he would appear 2 more times, and both those times would be quite surprising. There would be the surprise announcement of the plea deal at a status conference, and the status conference was actually a surprise in itself. It was announced on a Friday when most people are sort of going off on their weekends, and then the original, I think it was the preliminary hearing, became the sentencing hearing, and then it was all over. It was all over except Watts hadn't really told the truth, and the surprising thing was that there was a plea deal without expecting Watts really to say anything extra. And it actually turned out that the plea deal was in the works really early on, and that is something I'm going to deal with as part of this Aftermath mini-series. So in the previous episode of the phone data review, which was the very last entry, and I think because it was the very last entry, Nicole Kessinger gets a kind of almost the same status as Revelation in the Bible. It sort of has this kind of power because it's the final entry, and there's controversy there. It's Kessinger looking about how much money another mistress made in a similar case. Also, did people hate Amber Frey? And I spoke about that in the previous episode, but this is now 2 days later. That was what she Googled on the Sunday, the 19th, and that's where the phone data review terminates. But it's not as though things didn't go on when the phone data review stopped. Things did go on, including texts, including messages, and all the rest. So over the weekend, a weekend that was supposed to be spent celebrating a gender reveal, well, that was originally the date for the gender reveal. I don't know how many people know this, but the gender reveal that was supposed to be sort of over the weekend, maybe the Saturday, it was actually moved to the Monday at the last moment. I don't know how many of you know that. Chris Watts kind of said, can we cancel the gender reveal? It was cancelled, and then there was like a negotiation. Then the gender reveal was still on as long as no one spoke about it, and it was going to be the Monday, and of course it never happened. And this was part of the way Watts successfully manipulated Shanann. Anyway, this weekend that had just passed was supposed to have been, by then the gender reveal should have happened. It should have been celebrated. The Shanann's extended family would have known about it, and a lot of her thrivers, a lot of her friends in Aberdeen and so on. But subsequently that was then changed, and the weekend then would have become a romantic marriage-saving break in Aspen. But that didn't happen either. Instead, there was a candlelit vigil which was held outside 2825 Saratoga Trail, This vigil was held to remember Shanann, Bella, and Cece, and Nico, whose bodies had been recovered at an Anadarko well site earlier in the week. They had been missing since Monday morning. Now, this was the following week after that, Monday and then Tuesday. Hundreds gathered on the lawn of the big brown house as the sun was setting on the Saturday afternoon, around about the time, well, either that there should have been a gender reveal or Shanann and Chris Watts were supposed to be in. Shanann thought they were going to be in Aspen. In fact, she said to Eddie, I think it was Sunday, she said something like, I'm going to be very busy today, and I'm going to be MIA this time next week, and she's right. But she had no idea that she was going to be MIA the way that she was MIA.
A huge and heartbreaking show of support tonight in Frederick. Their neighborhood hosted a candlelight vigil for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts. The pregnant mother and her 2 young daughters were murdered this week.
Jeff Todd joins us live near that family home tonight. And Jeff, really an incredible response out there.
Karen, we were able to speak with Shanann's family. Somebody held up a video stream and they were able to watch it in North Carolina. Sandy, Shannann's mom, said she was amazed at how many people, strangers, came out. There's still a small gathering going on right now. This was an opportunity for the heartbroken community to come together and begin to heal.
So 2 years later, the question is, has the community healed? And one of the ways that communities do heal is when there's an accounting for something that happened, and that happens through a trial. That happens through telling the truth. Not just the person accused, but other people as well. Because there are 2 sides to every story. There's the side of the perpetrator, and there's also the circumstances that he was in. Whatever Watts' plans for his mistress, he spent his weekend in jail as well. You know, they were supposed to go apartment hunting the week following the murders, right? Not this week, the previous week. Instead, he was in jail by basically the middle of the week. And at the same time that he spent this weekend in jail, basically his first weekend in jail, Nicole Kessinger enjoyed her final weekend of anonymity. So for Nicole Kessinger, the clock was actually kind of ticking. It would be kind of a strange anonymity, because when it started seeping into the fabric that this was the person, this was the mysterious mistress, only some people realized it, only some people were sort of aware of it. Crime Rocket was one of a handful of people who mentioned her name. But it took until, and then there were others that speculated, could it be Amanda McMahon? Was he bisexual? Was he actually cheating on Shanann with a man? And so that kind of distracted from Kessinger. But when it got to very late in the whole story, around about, I think, November 15th or so, then Nicole Kessinger broke her silence and spoke to the Denver Post. And then it sort of became, that is actually when it became official news. That's how long it took. In any event, this weekend was her final weekend where most people couldn't say for sure who this other person was. No one knew then that Watts even had a mistress. No one knew for sure that he actually had a mistress. They weren't quite sure what this was all about. Bear in mind, at this point, the discovery documents weren't released. We didn't have access to the polygraph or what coders said or any of that. So at this point in the equation, kind of in real time, we still weren't sure what was actually going on. Did he have a mistress? What was kind of going on? And then everything changed. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit after the break. I'm going to ask the guys on YouTube to subscribe to the channel, to like, share, leave a comment. And before we get started here on Patreon, that is going to be the end of the preview for you guys. And then we're going to deal with what happens on Monday, which is when the warrantless arrest affidavit was released. Do you remember that? The date that it was actually released, well, it was the 20th. And then he appeared in court the next day. And that affidavit actually made no bones about the fact that Watts was actively engaged in an affair with a mistress, with a work colleague. That was also made quite clear. And when that happened, to some extent, her goose was cooked. I mean, people would start speculating, and she would have a few additional days' grace before her name began to blitz through social media. Some people paid attention to it, some people didn't. It wasn't kind of official news, it wasn't something the authorities commented on, and ultimately it was something Weld County certainly never commented on either. Weld County and Watts' defense counsel also worked feverishly over the weekend. By Monday, they had prepared 63 motions between them. I just want you to think about that. I sort of said earlier that, when Watts appeared in court, for these first two appearances, it looked like things were progressing, I don't want to say normally, because things were progressing incredibly quickly. If you compare how quickly things happened in the Watts case to the Storr case, to the Frazee case, to the Morphew case, to the Laurie Vallow case, what happened in the Watts case took place at blistering speed. What took months in those cases was taking literally days in the Watts case, and the motions were just flying out of the district attorney's office. And as I say, by the 21st, there were 63 motions. And a lot of them prepared by Watts' defense, which seemed to suggest that they were actively involved in preparing a defense. And we now know that, well, whether they were really, truly, genuinely preparing a defense, there was ultimately no defense. There was a plea deal. So what were those 63 motions about? It should be noted, when Watts appeared in court, this would be his second of a total of only 4 appearances ever. But when he appeared in court on the 21st, 2 years ago today, he denied killing his children at that time. Still denied killing his children, but was charged with their murders regardless. So that was the position on the 21st. He was still in that place of, he'd confessed to killing Shanann, but he denied killing his children. Despite this, the authorities rightly sort of ignored that part and said, no, I think you did everything. And he was charged with that regardless. And this must have seemed like a cruel blow to Watts, who, think about it, if you go through the Watts tapes, you go through it step by step. He is trying to give away as little as possible and get away with as much as possible. But they're just not, they're sort of like a dog on a bone. They're just not letting go. I'm talking about the agents. And so he's trying to give them a little bit more, just so that they'll go away. And eventually gives them what he thinks is the minimum. He says, okay, I murdered Shanann, and I don't mean to minimize that. I'm just saying he admitted that, but I didn't kill my own children. God, I would never do that. But I did put them in these oil tanks, and that's where their bodies are. And he kind of thought that was that kind of thing. And he would be liable or culpable for a third of the crime. So the full scale and scope, well, he would only be punished for a fraction of it. And then to find out that no, they actually didn't believe him at all. And it seems like he didn't pay attention when they said to him, you failed the polygraph. And he kind of said, well, I promise I told you the truth. Well, they didn't believe him, but they got enough on him to pin everything on him. And that must have been quite a shock to him. He must have believed that Coda and Lee had believed his lies. He must have believed that he'd kind of gotten away with something because, they'd pushed him to some extent, but ultimately he left that night with basically just confessing to that aspect. And of course, that is why they went to visit him again at Dodge Correctional to address the fact that he'd actually lied to them as part of the first confession. Of course, he lied to them as part of the second confession as well. And there also lies as part of the third confession. Some of those lies include him saying something like he made 2 attempts to bring about a miscarriage with Shanann. In other words, he poisoned Shanann twice, and then he said no, it was actually only once. So one of those statements is a lie. In any event, the arrest affidavit from the 21st and the charges made it clear what the authorities actually believed. Briefly, they accused Watts of the premeditated murder, that's acting after deliberation, of his wife and children, and accused him of committing all 3 crimes at his home before transporting their bodies to the oil site. Now, what I want to emphasize here is this is what the authorities did based on all the evidence they had, based on all the statements they had from a lot of different people, based on going into the house, looking at the GPS data, looking at the phone data, such as it was, and from what they could see, and this is in the arrest affidavit, all 3 crimes were committed at the home. And we know that that story has since changed to, well, the one crime was committed in the home, the other 2 at the well site. Then there was a attempted murder at the home, and then it was something else at the well site, and so on. All I'm saying is the end of the massive investigation. There were so many. The resources put onto this case were huge. The sheer number of FBI agents, CBI agents, police personnel across many police precincts. It wasn't just Frederick. There were quite a few. It's just staggering. It's like an army. And as a result of all of that, now bear in mind it's the FBI involved as well. It's some really smart investigators, and what they did is they looked at what had happened and they said, this is what we believe happened. And so when at the second, I don't really want to go into it, but at the second confession, when Coda asks what something like, it's sort of a leading question. He says, something like, did you load the bodies into the truck, or was everyone dead by then, or something? And then Watts says something like, well, isn't there a video? And then he says, well, it's not very clear. And because of this uncertainty, Watts sort of lets Coda believe what he wants to, right? And then Coda actually says to him, is there a reason you're not telling me? Is there a reason, if they were dead, that you'd be afraid to tell me that? And that's quite a pointed question, because there would be a reason. And the reason is, what is worse? Something like a premeditated murder because you wanted to talk to your mistress that night. In other words, there's no good reason. And I'm not saying the way that he did it otherwise was there's a good reason. There aren't any good reasons to murder somebody. Murder isn't a good choice. But what I'm trying to say is, to admit that you killed your own children because you couldn't wait to speak to your mistress is revolting. It's horrifying. It is, I don't even want to say embarrassing. It is absolutely unconscionable. To kill two children because you can't wait to talk to someone that you're having an affair with. So people have said, no, he told the truth because the reality would be much worse. What's worse than that? That story? Instead, his story is that he doesn't know what he was doing, and it's sort of an afterthought. He didn't really know what he was doing, and so it was an afterthought. Now, something that is quite interesting in that respect is, when you look at the autopsy, Bella and Cece still have their nightgowns on. If they still have their nightgowns on, why, talking about when they were put it into the oil tanks, why do people think that they ever went to sleep? Who goes to sleep in their nightgowns? Maybe they did, but it was summer, and Shanann didn't go to sleep in a nightgown. She was barely clothed. There's another thing in the discovery that's really interesting, which is where Watts said when he spoke to Shanann, he was fully clothed and he was on top of the covers. Now, what is that actually telling you? It's telling you that when he murdered Shanann, he was fully clothed. I don't know why the agents didn't ask him, well, what exactly were you wearing? Suppose they inferred it from the video, but I don't think that is true. But they should have asked him, what were you wearing when you were fully clothed that morning? And he probably would have answered what you saw in the video, but I don't think that is what he was wearing. Just an interesting point. It's also interesting that he said he was on top of the covers, but Shanann was under. What is that telling you? It's telling you that don't expect to find his DNA on Shanann. It's going to be protected by the cover. Just something to think about. So we got a really detailed look at, and in a sense, this was the most detailed look we would ever get, because at the sentencing hearing, there was virtually nothing added to what was said in the arrest affidavit. The only additional thing was elements from the autopsy, the one thing being the damage to Bella's frenulum that was mentioned, the district attorney making the shocking statement that Bella fought back, which I don't believe is true. And bear in mind, it's a premeditated murder. So why on earth would you want anyone to fight back? And Watts wasn't a confrontational person. In any event, so that was an aspect. And then there was also the mentioning, I can't remember if it was in the sentencing or the press conference afterwards or both, but what did come out right at the end on the 19th was the issue of Shanann's blood alcohol level. I think he did maybe mention it during the sentencing hearing, and just to say that the levels were actually found to be completely normal. And I spoke to a scientist, a forensic scientist that I know personally, that I how can I didn't work with him in court, but he was employed on a court case with a prosecutor, and I don't even want to say consulted. I was there, and we spoke a little bit, and I did have a little bit of an impact on that particular case. But the point is, that's how I knew this guy. I contacted him and I asked him to do an independent assessment on the blood alcohol levels, and he found them to be completely normal as well. It actually turned out to be quite a difficult thing to do because Shanann was pregnant on the one hand, and also because of the possibility of other things like lupus and certain medications, could that have impacted the blood alcohol levels. But ultimately his assessment was the same, that her blood alcohol was quite high, but completely natural given the circumstances. But something like that, just like the CCTV footage, could have been used by the defense to argue quite a convincing case, not a true case, but a convincing case that would have led to doubt in a jury's mind. You could definitely say it's not absolutely certain this or that. You could say the science shows it, but I don't know if the science necessarily proves it. I'm just saying that this would be something the defense counsel could use. And we know what would be the angle, and the angle would be that Shanann, if she was drinking alcohol, she actually didn't exercise the proper care for her unborn child. So didn't that show recklessness in terms of the lives of her children? And the answer is no. She was a really good mother, but I'm just saying this evidence, in inverted commas, could have been used by the defense, whether effectively, whether successfully, is anybody's guess. But that is the other thing that emerged besides what was in the warrantless arrest affidavit.
Morning, you're welcome to be seated. Okay, we are on the record. We are in Division 17 of the Weld County District Court, and we are here regarding Weld County case number 18CR2003, people of the state of Colorado versus Christopher Lee Watts. My name is Marcelo Cupcam, a district court judge here in Weld County, and I will be the presiding judge in this case. If I could please have the lawyers identify themselves for the record, starting with the prosecution.
Good morning, Your Honor. Michael Rourke on behalf of the people. Patrick Roach on behalf of the people.
Your Honor, John Walsh on behalf of the defense.
Jim Gerson on behalf of Mr. Watts. Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Rourke, did you want to make a record regarding compliance with the Victims' Rights Act?
Yes, Your Honor. We are in compliance with the Victims' Rights Act. Frank Rusick, who is Shanann Watts' father, is present in the courtroom, as is Frankie Rusick, who is Shanann Watts' brother. They are present in the courtroom, and we have advised them of the purpose of today's hearing and what we expect to occur.
Thank you. Mr. Watts, last week I gave you a limited advisement because charges had not been filed. They have now been filed, so I'm going to give you a full advisement. If at any time you have any questions, please let me know, and you're welcome also to certainly consult with your attorneys, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, you do not need to make any statements. Any statements you make can be used against you. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
You have the right to be represented by counsel, and if you're indigent, you have the right to request the appointment of counsel or consult with a public defender before any further proceedings are held, and I see that you've taken advantage of that right. Any plea that you make must be made voluntarily and not the result of undue influence or coercion. You understand?
Yes.
At this point, I have denied your right to bail, given the charges. You can certainly have a conversation shortly about that issue. You have the right to understand the nature of the charges. We'll go over that in a moment. You have the right to a jury trial. You also have the right to demand and receive a preliminary hearing within a reasonable time to determine whether probable cause exists to believe that the offenses charged were committed by you. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Let me I assume that the defense has received a copy of the complaint and information. Mr. Watts will explain to you what you have been formally charged with and what the possible penalties are. Count 1 alleges that on or about August 13, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts unlawfully, feloniously, after deliberation, and with the intent to cause the death of a person other than himself, caused the death of Shanna Watts in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes 18-3-102, subsection 1, subsection 8. And that crime is classified as murder in the first degree, a class 1 felony. Do you understand? Count 2 alleges murder in the first degree, also a class 1 felony, and it reads that between and including August 12, 2018 and August 13, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts unlawfully, feloniously, after deliberation, and with the intent to cause the death of a person other than himself, caused the death of Bella Watts in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes 18-3-102, subsection 1, subsection 8. Do you understand? Count 3 alleges murder in the first degree, a class 1 felony, and specifically it alleges that between and including August 12, 2018 and August 13, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts unlawfully, feloniously, after deliberation, and with the intent to cause the death of a person other than himself, caused the death of Celeste Watts in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes 18-3-102, subsection 1, subsection 8. Do you understand? Count 4 alleges murder in the first degree, a class 1 felony. It alleges that between and including August 12, 2018 and August 13, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts unlawfully, feloniously, and knowingly caused the death of Bella Watts, a child who had not yet attained 12 years of age, and the defendant was in a position of trust with respect to the victim in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes 18-3-102, subsection 1, subsection F. Do you understand?
So I'm not going to take those charges further, the reading of those charges further, but it is important to emphasize that the children's deaths are, the charges related to the children's deaths are sort of ambiguous and open in terms of the timeline. It's sort of the 12th or the 13th, and that applies to both children. And the reason why the prosecutors do this is because there's uncertainty around that. They think that it could be on the 12th and it could also be on the 13th. Now, bear in mind, Watts knows this as well. Watts knows that they don't know whether it's on the 12th or the 13th. So effectively, he can kind of choose what he's going to tell them. When they ask him, because they can't say for sure, he can choose what he's going to tell them. The other thing, which I don't know how many of you picked up on, but right in the beginning, the judge says to Watts, you kind of have a right to a trial, a right to a sort of a fair trial with a jury of your peers, and where you can have the charges against you kind of examined. It also talks about him being indigent, which is another word for not having money, and he didn't. He couldn't afford legal counsel. That's quite important to bear in mind, is that he literally had no money. He didn't have money for his house. He couldn't sell his house. He had something like $1,000 or $2,000 in his bank account. He literally had no money. He just couldn't afford legal counsel. So he was given legal counsel. He couldn't choose. He couldn't decide what was going to happen. And so he had to make do with what he had. And, who allocated legal counsel to him? Weld County. So the other aspect, which I think is also really important, is the judge was quite specific to say that a plea deal is something that is also sort of one of the cards that you can play in this legal arrangement, right? And as long as there's no coercion or duress, in other words, if you sign up to a plea deal, but it's completely voluntary, then it's legitimate. But if there's any coercion, if there's any kind of sort of manipulation and pressure, then it's not legitimate. And it is the True Crime Rocket Science position that there was coercion of a kind. Watts was unable to freely speak to his parents for a protracted period, basically for September, October, and half of November. So around about 3 full months, he didn't really get to talk to his family or anyone else besides his lawyers. You can say that that is a fault of Chris Watts, but you could also argue that he didn't really have access to the information he needed to make his decision. On the other hand, you could say, well, he's an adult. He was allowed to make a legal choice in his own defense. He was allowed to make a bad decision, and that's what he did. You must just bear in mind what is going on here is you're having this super speed legal process spinning into motion, and within this scenario, Chris Watts isn't really talking to other people, and he's not got the right sort of, not right, but he's not in the ideal legal position. And again, you could say, well, that's his own fault. If he couldn't afford an attorney, those are the cards he was dealt with. Nevertheless, it is a situation that, from a legal perspective, isn't necessarily appropriate. It is legal, but it's not, let's say, entirely fair, is it? It's not entirely transparent, is it? I mean, was Chris Watts making a choice where he was fully aware of everything that was going on, and he had access to everyone, and under those circumstances, he undertook the plea deal? Because the converse is, you make a plea deal in secret with a lot of doors locked and windows closed and curtains drawn, and within this situation where things are whirring, machines are spinning out of control in the background outside, right? In other words, reality outside his prison cell is speeding along, but at breakneck speed. But within the prison cell, he's sort of led to believe other things, and then the next thing it's all over. Do you think that is the ideal way to prosecute a case? It's an open question. Do you think that's the way crime should be prosecuted?
This afternoon, my office filed formal charges against Christopher Lee Watts. The charges that we filed are as follows: 3 counts of murder in the first degree after deliberation, 1 count naming Shanann Watts, 1 count naming Bella, 1 count naming Celeste. Each of those is a Class 1 felony.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Shanann's dad. This is her brother. We would like to thank everyone in the Frederick Police Department and all the agencies involved for working so hard to find my daughter, granddaughters, and Nico. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to the candlelight visual and saying all your prayers. They are greatly appreciated. And keep the prayers coming for our family. Thank you very much.
By the end of the day, the Chris Watts case was the highest profile true crime case in America. And I'm talking about the 21st. And the community believed a criminal trial, possibly involving a death penalty, was a foregone conclusion. At no point between this date, this is important to remember, at no point between this date, August 21st, and November 19, did the district attorney kind of basically say, well, you could probably say between this date, the 21st, and November 6th, that there wasn't going to be a trial. So between this date and November, so the whole of September goes by, the whole of October goes by, most or a lot of November goes by, with not much transparency from the district attorney, just not much talking. And that's something else I dealt with in a chapter of Rape of Cassandra, chapter 8, called Cindy's Blitz, which just talks about the silence as the days counted down to the sentencing hearing, where nobody said anything, and in that silence, Cindy had to step forward and say, "Hey, what is going on here? We want to talk to our son." Shanann's younger brother's angry rants on social media also seem to confirm the likelihood of a criminal trial as a foregone conclusion. And by that I simply mean Frankie was sort of saying on Facebook, almost like addressing Watts directly, saying, "You are going to pay. You're going to face your crimes in court, and there's going to be no mercy." And that's not what happened. So what happened to that sense of that thirst for justice? What happened to that?
He is set to appear in court again tomorrow.
And Denver 7's Megan Lopez is live this morning. Megan, the autopsies for Shanann and her daughters have been finished, but the results have not been released.
That's right, Molly. The results have not yet been released, but we know that those autopsies were performed on Friday. We also know that the defense filed a motion to try to force the coroner to collect DNA evidence from little Bella and Celeste's necks, but we also know that the judge denied that request. So today, here's what we're expecting to happen. Along with those formal charges, we're waiting for a judge to unseal the arrest affidavit for Chris Watts. That could give us a better idea of the case that police have built against him.
And so when you go through a lot of those charges retrospectively, you sort of ask yourself, not charges, motions, you've got to ask yourself, what was going on? What was kind of going on with the defense in the beginning? And I believe that, first of all, the autopsy results were kept secret, possibly for two reasons. The one is that there was very little that they found in the autopsies. Let me say that again. There's very little in the autopsies that actually showed or proved anything, especially not implicating Chris Watts. What I mean is there wasn't anything that was directly linking him to what happened to the victims, especially the children. It could literally have been anyone that killed them, because there was no DNA or fiber or anything like that could directly link a person to them, and that was quite a unique circumstance. There was also the blood alcohol level, which was actually something that they reinvestigated over a period of months, just in case Watts didn't sign up to the plea deal, right? So if they were going to have a preliminary hearing, they were going to have to explain this blood alcohol thing, not only in terms of the science of it, but also in terms of Shanann's behavior, what her friends witnessed. And so Baumhover actually had to go and interview people. This is also in the discovery, over a period of weeks after this time, after even the arrest affidavit was issued. He had to continue this investigation basically to clear Shanann, if that makes sense. She was actually investigating the possibility that Shanann had done something or had alcohol in the system, and his investigation showed, or seemed to show, she didn't. I'm just saying that this was in the offing at that time. The other possibility is that Chris Watts himself asked that the autopsy results the full autopsy results be withheld to sort of protect what was left of his reputation, or just that he just felt, okay, let's not reveal this. It could also be the other way around, that Weld County said, can we hold this back, or something like that. I don't know. But that is definitely an interesting aspect, is that at this point the autopsy results were available, and the prosecutor didn't want to release them, which meant it wasn't very good for the prosecution's case. In theory, the other side to it is also that this motion from the defense saying something like they wanted DNA swabs from the children, and this was from the defense, and what that was seemed to be suggesting was that Watts thought Shanann's DNA would be on the children. And you might say that doesn't that prove the case? In other words, doesn't that prove the defense case? It can certainly reinforce the defense case, but there is another possibility, and that possibility is if all three bodies were in the back seat of the truck, then their DNA would possibly have mixed on one another. I'm talking about if you imagine three bodies almost piled on top of one another or resting close to one another, then that DNA could be actually contaminated. But if you didn't know what really happened there, it might seem as if this was DNA based on a direct encounter. Does that make sense? The other possibility is that the defense cynically were trying to test Watts's version and were kind of doing this not necessarily to prove that the DNA was there, but actually to prove that it wasn't there. In other words, they were doing it in a way that it seemed like they were assisting their client, but were they really? And so all of this comes from the immediate aftermath to the end of the phone data review. All we're really talking about here are 2 days after the phone data review ends, and look at how much happens in the 2 days. How much you've got to join dots and make inferences and ponder what was really, really, really happening. And we're still wondering to some extent today. So in the next episode, I'm going to take you through a completely alternative universe to the phone data review. And we're going to look exclusively at texts between Shanann and Eddie over that same period. There are a lot of texts, so that's something we're going to go through, and we'll probably do that around about the 25th. So look out for that. That'll be on the $2 tier. And then the final part in this 3-part mini-series will be dealing with the plea deal itself. And that is something we will look at on the 29th of August, also on the $2 tier. Thank you for listening to the most authentic voice in true crime, and I will see you guys next time.